Hi, welcome to my presentation, the first of my course on initiation into modern mysticism, where the goal is to look at modern science and the recent discoveries pertaining to how energy behaves and what we call plasma behaves, and how understanding that by looking at the mechanics of these things, we're able to begin to understand ourselves from a more holistic perspective and also be able to work with the universe in a way that is beneficial to ourselves. So, with that, I've put together this first module, that I'm calling Stillness and the Threshold of Creation. The purpose of this module is to walk through how the universe manifests itself through this ultimate state of stillness. This stillness is found at the center of everything, and we're going to look at how that plays out as well as what you can do with it in this presentation. So to begin, if you look at the Tibetan Buddhist teachings, such as those found in the Secret Oral Teachings in the Tibetan Buddhist Sects, a book by Alexandra David Neal and Lama Yangaden, they say that the tangible world is movement. It's not a collection of moving objects, but movement itself. There aren't any objects, they're just things in motion in relationship to other things in motion. So really, something can only be separate if it's able to move in a coherent fashion in relationship to the rest of the environment or universe. And this is a fundamental key understanding of how the universe works and how we can use it to our advantage. So to begin, I think we should look at what is stillness actually. Because this entire universe is in motion. All the galaxies, all the solar systems, all the planets, all the atoms that make up those things, and ourselves are constantly spinning in relationship to other things that are spinning. Something is only separate if it's able to maintain its own motion in relationship to the other motions. And paradoxically, as we'll get into soon in this presentation, everything in the universe is actually trying to reach a resting point or stillness so that it can again return to the equilibrium state of the universe. Which leads us into one of the fundamental Hermetic laws of the universe. Everything moves in cycles. There's an ebb and flow to literally everything in this universe. It all swings between one extreme and the other, moving from, you could say, a positive pole to a negative pole, or a negative pole to a positive pole. And this rhythmic motion represents everything that can exist, because nothing can really stay in one state forever, because constantly the universe is trying to pull it back down to stillness. So all physical phenomenon, all of our emotions, whether we go from these extreme highs of happiness to these extreme lows of depression, these are normal systems that are playing out throughout the universe. The best way to look at this is to look at a pendulum and how it swings. Because a pendulum is literally moving back and forth from one extreme to the other. So if you imagine each edge of the pendulum before it starts to swing back, this is a slight moment of stillness. And this moment of stillness is what creates the shockwave back. This ebb and flow has a moment of stillness at each extreme. And this is what many call potential energy, or the unmanifest, soon to be manifest. All waves in science behave this way. They all have an ebb and flow, and they all interact in this way. And they are really just a series of waves that are able to sustain this motion in relationship to everything else, as we've talked about. So, extending on the law of rhythm in waves, there are two different kinds of waves in all wave mechanics. The first is the waves we're all commonly familiar with, which is transverse waves. And these move in your typical up and down motion, like the waves on top of an ocean. Then there are also longitudinal waves, which are less commonly known about, but equally as important, if not more so. And these flow from the center of whatever we're talking about and recedes from the edges in stacks, like the most common earthquake waves that travel through the planet when earthquakes occur. These are called P waves, as in primary waves, and they're actually the cause of the up and down motion of the ocean. And the reason this is because these longitudinal waves move in packets, so up and down motions coming from the core. When you hit the bottom of the ocean, it causes a slight vibration, and this causes the undulation and the up and down movement of the ocean. In this way, these two waves represent both the ebb and flow of all measurable waves and are basically akin to an inhalation and exhalation when we take our breaths. Here's a video demonstrating how this works on things like the ocean. As you can see with the arrow, the foam is sliding onto the seashore and then slowly sliding back into the oncoming waves before finally meeting the oncoming waves and then being carried with that motion back into the oncoming up and down transverse waves. As you can see, the foam stays there pretty much the entire time, existing, on top of the ocean. And here's another video describing how longitudinal waves act in relationship to transverse waves.
In a longitudinal wave, the disturbance that makes up the wave is along the direction in which the wave travels. Longitudinal waves are also referred to as compression waves. In a transverse wave, the disturbance that makes up the wave is perpendicular to the direction in which the wave travels.
So I think that's a pretty good demonstration of what you can do or how you can visualize transverse versus longitudinal waves. And as we saw in this video where it moves in a compression-like motion, this compression in between the two different compression points can basically be thought of as a packet or a container of data or energy. Continuing on the longitudinal waves versus transverse waves, there's a transition point of these waves where the up and down waves become these packet-like motions, as we saw when the waves crested on the seashore. This movement and change of momentum is sometimes called a translation of vorticity. And to put it simply, when these waves, these up and down waves, lose their momentum, there's a zeroing out of the speed and the intensity. And because they have to go back into the medium, it slides back in and actually backfills whatever we're talking about. So in the example of the ocean, you're actually filling in the ocean, and then this backfilling is creating more ripples and thus creating more motion on top of the ocean. So I think I said that a little better here on the bottom. When a wave crashes against the shore, the returning flow creates interference patterns and pressure differences that contribute to a new wave formation. It's a dynamic dance between incoming transverse motion and localized compression pulses, or the longitudinal waves. And with that, I think we're ready to talk about the fundamental geometry that all energy takes on, and that is the shape of a torus. And a torus is a geometry that explains the electrical path that energy takes when circling around a common center point. Plasma composes, and they're commonly found in configurations of different plasma, which is a state of energy which is highly charged and full of free electrons that can do various things. And plasma composes up to 99.9% of the known universe, which means that basically everything we know of contains this basic shape and is composed of plasma. A torus has an outer wall on it, sometimes referred to as a double layer, and this outer wall contains all of the transverse motion, all the up and down waves, and contains it within a discrete area for that entity or being to maintain itself in. And just like we talked about with the ocean waves, when they lose their momentum crashing on the seashore, when electrical waves inside of a plasma torus reach that center point, they begin to lose all motion or move so fast that they're no longer appear to be moving. And this causes, again, this translation of vorticity that spreads out into the entire medium as these longitudinal waves. Here is a better picture of the inside of a torus and how it operates. If we look here with this blue line and this red triangle, if we imagine energy coming from the right-hand side in a circular fashion and then spinning up the top and then going back in through the top, what we have here is that longitudinal waves are beating out of the center in 360 degrees around the entire toroid sphere. And as these longitudinal waves hit each barrier at the edge, it ripples back and then creates an interference pattern that constructively can interfere, adding to the total information of the universe. Now, what's really cool about this is that longitudinal waves can infinitely compress and infinitely stack, because what you're going to end up doing is just compressing more and more data on top of other data that's already been compressed. And in this way, every part of space, because of the nature of how it spreads out in the entire sphere, has the information of the entire universe. Here are some more pictures of a torus and how they can be inside and outside of other toruses working together. On the top left, there's an atom. Here in the middle is a series of torsion donuts or torsion fields embedded within each other. And as you can see, they constructively are able to feed off one another, creating a solid structure. This is much like how we operate with our different chakras, where each one is its own toroidal donut inside of the other one. Here on the right, you can see a picture of the Earth represented by its torsion field, where again, the core of the planet is compressing all of this energy and then creating these longitudinal waves like we talked about that create the motion on the ocean or earthquakes with these P waves. And also our hearts create a toroidal field every time they beat. Here's a video I found that demonstrates how these torsion fields can actually constructively interfere and create solid points or nodes that can sustain themselves. So each one of these colors is going to send out a wave, and then it's going to bounce off of the barriers and then combine. Now here's where it gets interesting. See that beautiful convergence point? That's everything in the universe. Everything in the universe relies on everything else in the universe to sustain itself. We're no exception. We're composed of many cells sustaining itself, which means that life is in motion. Beating hearts are well known to create magnetic fields that extend well beyond the physical body. Some people say up to 60 feet. I've seen people say it goes all the way to the ionosphere. But when our blood stops moving, we stop breathing, and our hearts stop beating, the external world comes to reclaim that energetic structure that's self-sustaining. And the reason this is because the Earth itself and the universe itself are self-sustaining. and is trying to just reuse the energy it's already is. We just think it's ours. And here you can see on the right is a picture showing the toroidal donut around the body. And keep in mind, each one of these chakras have their own toroidal field. And that is the vortex, or the wheel within wheels, commonly referred to, and what chakra actually means. And getting back to more Hermetic principles, as above, so below. A living body is a collection of cells moving at a common frequency to that being. Each cell has its own connection to the ultimate stillness, which is, as we discussed, at the center of that toroidal structure. This connection is how cells know how to be different cells from stem cells. It's how animals have instincts, and it's how the universe just keeps itself intact. Dr. Michael Levin is a cellular biologist who researches cellular behavior based on the electrical potentials. He's found that these cells actually read the underlying field of the body as it's growing, and then depending on the underlying voltage signal, they will become different cells depending on what's missing in the environment. So for instance, if they're in a region where there's supposed to be a bone cell, they'll notice that there is a voltage or a energetic signature that is a bone, and they fit into that slot and try to solve that puzzle piece and become a bone cell. I have a feeling this is how much of the intelligence works in the universe, and it's kind of a here's the pattern, what can go and fill it in kind of thing. This creates a coherent package or a pattern that creates a complex energetic envelope that a being can inhabit. As above, so below with stars and planets. Just like how a pendulum swings from its natural resting point here in the center to the extremes, cores of planets are generally believed to be molten. Like ours is molten iron. Jupiter's, I'm not sure. But either way, the cores of these planets are believed to be so compressed that they're spinning near stillness. Cores of stars are also believed to be this way in compressed gases, which would mean they're even closer to the still point because of the airy nature of gases and the ability for them to be compressed even more. Here's a beautiful photo of the James Webb Space Telescope that they took of infrared. If you look closely here, you can see the faint outline of a triangle or a pyramidal structure or a tetrahedron that goes from each corner here and here to the bottom south pole, and then the same thing from the south pole to the north pole. This is a shape that's been talked about in mystery schools for forever. It's called the Star-Tetrahedron, sometimes called the Star of David, or the Merkaba. This shape is the shape that represents how things implode at their center. And I find it absolutely amazing that now with our technology catching up to what the ancients suggested, we're able to actually see these things with our technology. You can even see a ring around Jupiter where it's imploding around that central band. We'll get into this more with the upcoming modules in the course, but this is amazing. This is a sure sign that we're onto something, and the next few decades are going to be absolutely amazing. Here is an image of Dan Winter put together an image showing the Merkaba or star tetrahedron on top of a human being, and how when it implodes, it collapses and creates other familiar sacred geometry shapes, like the dodecahedron, the icosahedron, the cube, and a tetrahedron. All related to how things implode, which we will get into further. again, everything is moving from galaxies to subatomic particles. Nothing is really standing still. Motion is the language of the universe, and how you're moving in relationship to something else is literally how you represent yourself and are able to even tell what you are in relationship to anything else. Even your thoughts have a ebb and flow to them, as we discussed at the beginning, because you can go from extreme happiness to extreme depression in an afternoon, and you'll have no idea why that happened. But it's just a normal process of the universe trying to reach equilibrium or return to its ultimate source. This interrelationship is sometimes called in different fields or different emerging thoughts as things like the morphogenic field or an electromagnetic field, or sometimes called the quantum field. But they're all really the same thing at different states and for different situations. Life is sustained motion at a shared frequency, and that shared frequency is its resonance field, or the organisms that it exists with, or communities, like even social clubs, or different planets with its group of moons, or even a local solar system, or even a soul pod where we have a soul family that may not even be incarnated with us at this moment. All of these are based on the same fundamental property, and that is they all share a common still point, which is the universe itself, source. This is also the cause of the phenomenons we know of, like telepathy or overlapping ideas and thoughts and inspirations. Because as we looked at with the other pictures with human body and different parts of it, the mind field is actually outside of the brain and can overlap with others, as well as be non-local when moving in a coherent state, reaching stillness. Anything that isn't still is actually closer to being in complete chaos, because the farther you are from being able to reach this still point, which is the source of the universe, you're able to, be separate from the universe. So this separateness can be seen as chaos or development or individuation. But when something that is chaotic tries to reach a point of stillness, like during states of meditation or rest or doing something they enjoy even, they are aligning themselves with the underlying nature that gives rise to themselves. This means that center point of everything is really just an anchor for everything that you are. So what being spiritual becomes is more about trying to maintain a middle path between those two extremes. And I think it's no accident that we have the middle path in Buddhism because of this reason. Or why the sign of Libra is represented by the scales and said to represent balance, because it's about being that center spoke of the scales that you're able to actually be the most effective in this life. Which again brings us back to what is the purpose of this life. And the purpose is to maintain that center point of stillness while also individuating your emotions in relationship to the rest of the universe. And while stillness may seem like it's the absence of presence or movement. It's the exact opposite, because it's only with perfect stillness that something is moving that at an infinite speed or is not moving in relationship to other things. And because of that, it's existing within the region that everything is spinning on, or the axis in which it all spins. This means that when you get close to stillness or are approaching stillness, you're able to tap into everything that's not really local to you. And you can begin to tap into things that are commonly called the quantum field, non-local intelligence, or the sophonic frequencies within the universe. Because as one is farther away from stillness and individuated as a separate motion, the goal is to eventually return back to stillness with a new set of longitudinal waves, if you will, like when the ocean crests on the seashore. The ocean is bringing back the data, or the bubbles, from when it reached the seashore and then retract back in. This basically means that the ocean is feeling the seashore and then bringing that data back in so that it can understand where it's at, what it's doing, and what's around it. And when it recedes back in, it's actually reacting to the seashore and responding. This is exactly how consciousness works. And the paradox is that everything is actually trying to reach stillness through this ebb and flow. But it's through not reaching this stillness that something's even able to be manifested. Building on this, if you look at something that has zero velocity or zero speed in relationship to something else, it spans all of space and time. Again, because it's operating at that base level that everything is spinning on. So everything that's spinning on this base axis has access to it, which is infinite potential. And thus zero movement is total presence. Which is why when we get into deep meditations, we're able to feel like we're attached to something greater, because we are. Again, infinite speed is equal to infinite reach. Because from stillness, there's no time delay, because you're not moving in relationship to anything. Everything is right here, right now. There isn't even anything else. The longitudinal waves, again, they operate in stacks. So within that stillness, as everything grounds out and becomes still, it just keeps stacking information infinitely, forever. This is what causes our reality to be holographic, where everything within the universe, every atom, every cell, every being, at its core, contains the entire universe. Building on that, we have to understand that what we call source or the Godhead is infinite because it exists within everything. Source is not out there. It's literally the 0 point field, as is commonly called in science, which gives rise to literally everything. And every time something oscillates on top of that still point, not only is it reading the data of like when the ocean crests on the seashore, but it's reading the data of every time the ocean is crested on that seashore, as well as every other ocean that's crested on the seashore in the universe, as well as every bug who's ever existed. To find this source of everything, you don't really have to travel outward or go to the center of the galaxy. You can find it in yourself. And you can do this through meditation. Different meditative practices will help you get there. There's different energetic centers in the body that are more conducive to find that stillness point. I personally found it both at the center between the two hemispheres of my brain, and also the sacred spot in my heart, as it's commonly referred to, which I have a meditation on my channel which will help you get there. This center point is perhaps the most important thing people need to understand about themselves in relationship to the universe. Because potential energy is stored there. And what potential energy is, it's compressed or unmoving energy that is only pure potential. And it's activated through different intents or intent. Because even if you stab it with some sort of device that causes shock waves to come out or electricity to start flying around, you have intent to interact with that field, causing potential to rise. And, because we're conscious beings with an electromagnetic brain, the potentials arise from the stillness, which then becomes part of our reality. Metaphysically, this looks like our consciousness being entangled with the still point or the quantum field. And based on our intentions, our expectations, what we're doing physically, a different standing wave, emotionally, and whatever else we haven't quite figured out yet. When all of these combine, this is how we manifest things. And it's also why the axiom, all is mind, couldn't be truer. Because although what we consider to be a mind usually comes from brains, even a rock is still interacting with that still point within itself so that it can be in tune with the longitudinal waves, or the scalar waves as they're sometimes called, that form the rock. And because we're expecting to see a rock over there, and the rock is expecting to be a rock, we see a rock. This co-creation is literally what makes the universe go round. Further, expectations and consciousness basically are the interactions between two entities sharing a common still point, or being entangled or quantumly entangled to a shared experience. And depending on the frequency or the relationship something has, like two human beings are going to recognize that they're both human beings, two dogs are going to recognize they're both dogs, and two rocks are just two rocks. But the experience of separateness comes from maintaining your motion on top of the concept of being whatever you are. So in this universe, the observer isn't passive. What we expect or even intend to happen is the basis of our experience, which might be the most important thing that I want to try to convey through this entire course. You are a direct creator of your reality. And I don't just mean you see things and you can choose how to react. If you want to get sad, angry, throw things. No, I mean that, for instance, when I started this presentation, I didn't have the highest expectations, but I slowly got myself to understand, no, I should expect this to do pretty well. And as I did, I felt myself getting more and more motivated to do this. This is literally me pulling a state from the future towards me by aligning myself emotionally, physically, by making the presentation and scheduling everything, to pull in the best, if not one of the best, outings for this presentation. This is usually what's missing in larger talks about manifestation or people talking about how you manifest. You have to get these three components aligned in order to actually start pulling the field towards you. And again, we'll get further into the actual mechanics of this as we get further into this course, but this is the fundamentals, and it really can't work any differently. Which brings us to a frame of motion in relationship to the rest of the universe. Because motion is always relative. There is no universal center point, as we talked about, except for within everything. So each being has its own reference to itself and the cosmos, and each being or individual has a unique path to align with it. This is the alignment we've been talking about, and as we just talked about, this allows true manifestation. Because just like the old alchemists knew back when Newton was trying to transmute gold, you have to get your center point aligned with the center point of whatever you're trying to transmute. You have to become quantumly entangled. And to give you a preview of how this is going to get a little more in depth with how this all functions and how you can start to think of it, Max Planck came up with a system to try to figure out what happens inside of a black box when waves enter it. And he devised through mathematics that there is a point in which space and time as we know it breaks down and can no longer be thought of as distinct things. He referred to this as the like a quantum barrier, where things go from, particles, or what we call particles, to no longer being able to be cut up into quantized units, and they become quantum. However, this very, very tiny length of measurement actually still measures something in relationship to something else. So it's actually a measurement of distance, or the speed of light, between two objects. And he's saying you can't have anything smaller than this scale. And this is, for all intents and purposes, as far as we know right now, or can even experiment with, where stillness is. Right at Planck length and below it is where all the potentials lie. So to me, this says that it's going to be a while before our technology can consciously and precisely interact with this underlying stillness field or quantum field, or the longitudinal aspect of the electromagnetic field. Because, I mean, look at how small that is. It's incredibly tiny. However, with our minds, because they're not really dependent on the scale of this universe, and our minds themselves being based around what's commonly called the third eye chakra, or the Ajna chakra, is based around a torsion field, meaning it has that common center point at the center of that chakra or vortex or wheel within wheel. So our minds themselves are using this stillness or source as its backdrop or foundation. So again, this is why stillness is the source of everything, and how it's a very common feature to all living things in this universe. And this stillness, due to how we talked about how things can compress and stack, once they get below this Planck scale and we really have no idea what's kind of going on in the universe, the only thing we can devise is that our intentions and different energetic signatures can pull things out of this field seemingly out of nowhere. And I believe this is the beginning of us understanding how we can utilize these forces to, manifest our dream job, or attract prosperity in our life, or, even just align ourselves so that we can have the optimal path to reach whatever end goal we think we want to reach. And the stronger our intent gets and our emotions are aligned with the field, the more easily we're able to pull that thing out of the ether or the quantum field or just pure potential. And I think eventually we're going to be able to do this with things like in Star Trek, like the replicator here on the right, where by giving it the frequencies that that mug is contained by, they're able to just create it out of energy. And by doing this with our bodies and our minds, we're able to just manifest things, and we'll probably get really good at it in the coming millennia. And just to do a quick recap here, as we discussed, stillness is really the base level of the universe, where everything, every atom, molecule, cell, organism, organ, chakra, whatever, even a storm on the planet, every single thing has a center point where it's trying to reach stillness. Going back to the storm analogy I just used, a tornado is constantly trying to spin out its energy to ground out at its vortex. And it's the journey towards stillness that actually is of value to any individual, because they will reach stillness again. It's just a matter of how they get there. So through every breath we take, every intention we have, and our awareness, we're able to actually tune into that base frequency that is the holder of our stillness. And this stillness is a sort of sacred space that is shared by everything in the universe as a sort of, well, think it's like the center pillar of the scales. It's always there, letting the whole thing teeter-totter. This threshold of creation is not just a metaphor. It's there energetically, and it's there consciously for us to work with constantly. That pretty much concludes the presentation. I want to say thank you. I'm open for questions. And also, I'm offering a soul blueprint where I look at your astrology and also human design and numerology. Look at everything from a more esoteric perspective, put together a report for you, and then we can discuss your findings and go over any questions you'd have. This has gotten really good reviews, and it's a really valuable service. So if you're interested, I'd encourage you to take advantage of it. And just a preview of what's coming up in these upcoming modules for this course. Next, we're going to look at what quantum really means, as we're going to dive more into how you can use longitudinal waves within transverse waves to begin to manifest what you want. You can do this with your mind. You can do this with technology. Then we're going to look at fractality, which is a way to say that everything is self-similar to everything else, and how this is impacted or reflected in the tree of life. We're going to look at how one electron can represent the entire universe, how consciousnesses are just individuated versions of that electron, how consciousness scales through the universe, how it has different types of intelligences that it scales into, humanity's role with these intelligences, understanding where we are, where we've been, where we're going, our plasma future. We'll look at technology. We'll look at things like telepathy, how we're going to heal, how we're going to make flying vehicles, and also see where the soul's taking us. And then finally, we're going to understand what it would mean to be a galactic species, going from tending just the Earth to tending the entire galaxy. And yeah,